Let's talk about China. Let's talk about China. So I don't know if you guys saw, but over New Year's, the Chinese had a very large military drill off the coast of Taiwan. And the way that the Trump administration has reacted to it has been seemingly largely downplaying it, treating it as if it's not a very serious situation.
Doing naval exercises basically to test encircling Taiwan. Can you explain to us what your knowledge is of that? What do you think about that? Have you had any discussions with China?
Well, I have a great relationship with President Xi, and he hasn't told me anything about it. I certainly have seen it, but he hasn't told me anything about it, and I don't believe he's going to be doing it. No, nothing worries me.
But
nothing.
You said where there's smoke, there's fire, right? So if you're encircling, if you're doing naval exercises and air exercises.
Well, I've been doing naval exercises for 20 years in that area. Now people take it a little bit differently, but in fact, larger than they're doing right now. So we'll see. But they've been doing that for 20, 25 years, yeah.
Now, what's interesting about this is he seems to treat it like this is just another drill. They've done a lot of drills before. Don't worry about it. Xi Jinping hasn't told me anything yet. I'm good friends with Xi. Trump always emphasizing his personal relationships and how it makes him a good deal maker. He hasn't really presented many deals to prove that yet, but you know, it makes him a good deal maker. And maybe because it's not something that it might work with a royal, kind of hard to make it work with a republic or Chinese system or the Russian system. Anyway, he seems to be largely downplaying it, even going as far as to say that, you know, there's been larger ones in the past. So as if to say that this one was actually relatively small. What's interesting is this one was not relatively small. While this was not the largest military drill ever conducted, this one did not, for example, Chinese aircraft carriers did not participate. While they had a lot of other aircraft participate, they had a lot of aircraft participate, they had helicopters, they had other ships participate. They did not have aircraft carriers participate. So they did not have every single type of craft you would expect to participate in one of these types of operations if they were to try to be doing a one-for-one style military drill of an invasion of the island. It is still one of the largest naval military drills in the history of Chinese-Taiwanese relations, and they still included a lot of assets, including amphibious air assault assets off the east coast of Taiwan and long-range rocket fire being tested off the coast of Taiwan. They also emphasized the blockade aspects of the exercises in their propaganda, talking about it, you know, constantly to not only test the ability of the Chinese Navy to conduct such an operation in the certain areas of long-range missile fire and blockading, but also to put political pressure on the government, because the new government, Li's government, is very, very much one that will under no circumstances negotiate away their independence. He is somebody who views Taiwan already as an independent state. He is somebody who has been a longstanding advocate for Taiwanese independence. But yeah, so they tested their amphibious air assault assets. They tested the long-range rocket fire, and the propaganda machine has been in overdrive in trying to emphasize the blockade aspects of the operation, as if to put pressure on the Taiwanese government, which they know is deeply rooted in pro-Taiwanese independence activism. And so the government sees this as not only a military exercise to test their long-range rocket fire, but the Chinese also saw it as an opportunity to test their ability to add diplomatic pressure to the Taiwanese government, while I expect this to just be part and parcel of the operation, trying to see American reaction, trying to gauge American reaction. While Xi Jinping isn't directly calling up Donald Trump saying, "Did you see how big my ship is? My ship is very big today off the coast of Taiwan." He doesn't need to do that. He puts his ships off the coast of Taiwan, fires off rockets, and the message is set in and of itself. And if you listen to Xi Jinping's New Year message, which I'm sure everybody, all the youth in the United States is always talking about, oh, I can't wait to listen to Xi Jinping's New Year message and read the little red book and you all sing the Chinese national anthem. But if by chance that's not what you guys decided to do on New Year's, I'll tell you, he talked about Taiwan, he talked about reunification, and he talked about it in the same context of a conquest of the island being the inevitable goal of the Chinese people. And if the island will not be reunified with China peacefully, then they will use violence. They didn't say it in the way I said it. Number one, they said it in Chinese, but they also, of course, said it with a little bit more vagueness. But the message is the same, which is Taiwan must be part of China, and it will either become part of China through peaceful means, or they'll have a war with Taiwan and they will conquer Taiwan. And it is better that no other country in the world interferes with their, what they deem to be, an internal affair, because to them, Taiwan is a part of China. The scary thing about that is not just the threat to of course, the Taiwanese people, the threat to our microchip manufacturing, a threat to an American ally, a threat to what these people want. They decided when they got rid of Chiang Kai-shek, they got rid of their dictatorship. They didn't say, hey, I want to be part of Red China. I want to have a Chinese-style communist government. No, they decided to have a democracy. They decided to have a republic. So these are all things that can be guarded, but Taiwan is one of the most dense countries on the planet. When you look at its urban centers, and if you were to exclude the mountainous regions, Taiwan is the most dense country on the planet. A bombing campaign of those cities would be an absolute humanitarian catastrophe for the people living there. So when I think about a war with Taiwan, it is something that has to be avoided, not only because we don't know if we'd win, we don't know if we'd lose, but the war would be particularly brutal if the Chinese were not able to bring it to a quick conclusion. If they had a difficult landing on the shores of Taiwan, were held on the beaches, and the Chinese then tried to bomb Taiwan into submission, if it did not go 100% to plan, whole operation done in a week, they have Taipei, then we're talking about a potentially extremely bloody and brutal war. And so it should be an American priority, not only from a humanitarian perspective, but also from an American trade perspective, due to how many American business interests are embedded in the country to avoid a war by any means necessary. Now, that doesn't mean that you just hand over Taiwan to the Chinese. Of course, the Taiwanese are not going to agree to that. And I don't think that's moral. So the only other option is to reinforce the Taiwanese and try to find a way to maintain a status quo with China that allows the Taiwanese to live in peace while avoiding a wider war. And I understand that Donald Trump doesn't want to, shake here. He can't hear that there's a military drill off the shores of Taiwan and start shaking on stage like, oh my God, what are we going to do? But the idea that this wasn't a big deal, they've been doing drills all the time, and oh, this is actually not one of the biggest ones. It is one of the biggest ones. It is not the biggest one, but it is one of the biggest ones. And since the last Taiwanese president was sworn into office, they have continued to escalate the size of these operations and the frequency of these operations. So that's something that has to be acknowledged. And we're not getting a lot of public acknowledgement of that from the presidency. It's not like the Pentagon is unaware, but we're not getting a lot of prioritization of that from the presidency. We've gotten aid packages to Taiwan canceled to be replaced with weapon sales. We've seen some, needling of the thread of the relationship to try to sustain weapons to Taiwan while reframing towards this business-minded executive branch that we seem to have now. But there hasn't been any larger reaction than this from Donald Trump. And so here's my question. If the Chinese attempted to use the continuation of the war in Ukraine and America's focus on other realms like Venezuela or Gaza in the Middle East to try to launch an operation against Taiwan, is Donald Trump somebody that will actually throw his weight behind the Taiwanese? I don't know. And that might be enough to dissuade a Chinese invasion, as they probably don't know either. Trump is kind of a wild card, but that's the problem. If it's a dice roll, the question then becomes, will the Chinese leadership view that dice roll as better odds than what they'll get in a decade from now, when Trumpism and all of the values and worldview that comes with it might have already come and gone by then? I mean, the United States is 250 years old. You know, we just had our 250th anniversary. We've had a lot of different viewpoints from the executive branch of exactly how foreign policy can be done. So they could view it as a rare opportunity. But that also is still a dice roll. And while the Chinese economy is not collapsing, the Chinese economy has a lot of problems. And to throw itself face first into a war like this, which will hurt the Chinese economy, especially if the war drags on, and a failure on reunifying Taiwan would be a political disaster for the People's Republic of China, those are still things that could disincentivize it. But the United States, under Joe Biden, had this type of hint that was coming out of everything that came out of Joe Biden when he spoke about Taiwan. When he spoke about Taiwan, he would be asked, will you defend Taiwan if Taiwan was attacked by the Chinese? And his answer was yes. Afterwards, his staff would come out and be like, oh, I mean, he's just an old man. I don't know why he said that. But I mean, of course, our relationship with the Chinese hasn't changed. And then you go back to Joe Biden, and then ask him again. So Joe Biden, if Taiwan is attacked, will we defend it? And once again, Joe Biden says yes. And he did this like 3, 4, or 5 times. And every single time his staff would go out, try to reel in the statement. But that created a type of edge to Joe Biden on the issue of Taiwan that was sharp enough to dissuade the Chinese, I think, from attempting anything. Because even if the staff reel it in, if every time you ask the president of the United States, will you defend Taiwan, he says yes, that's going to create enough uncertainty in the Chinese to probably back them off. While it keeps it vague enough to maintain the standard, you know, the one China standard that has been talked about for so long, it also put enough uncertainty about the idea of America just backing off, and in fact push it in the other direction so much that it gave it enough point that I thought it was an effective policy. I thought it was effective enough. Is Donald Trump's position on this particularly clear? I think canceling the aid could be viewed as anti-Taiwanese, but he wants to replace it with weapon sales. You could say in one breath, he doesn't really confront the Chinese with this issue, wanting to help negotiations on the matter. But on the other hand, if you read the national security strategy, it seems to entirely be focused upon repositioning our assets from elsewhere to face down the Chinese. And facing down the Chinese without the Taiwanese wouldn't really make much sense. So I think America's position on the matter is still hazy enough that China is probably still very interested in gauging how Donald Trump is going to react. And I don't think he's going to take the Joe Biden approach, whether because he wants to get better deals from the Taiwanese or because he's not sure of his position himself. But we'll have to wait and see, because this will not be the last military drill the Chinese will do off the shores of Taiwan during Trump's administration. I do also want to throw out there, while I've talked about before how the Europeans could have China approaching them, trying to find a way to meld the Chinese-European bridge to try to take advantage of this Euro-Atlantic divide, China did threaten to cancel key trade talks with the UK after a British minister visited Taiwan in June. So while I do think the Chinese would like the access to those European markets, they are not willing to compromise it on the issue of Taiwan to take advantage of the transatlantic divide.